So welcome to you, two great young intellectuals, two spiritual leaders, the French rabbi Delphine Horvilleur and Danish sociologist, religion sociologist, Imam in the making, Sherin Khankan, two pioneers breaking new ground. I would like to ask you first, and you first, Delphine, your choice to become a rabbi. Do you see that as a step in the universal struggle for women's rights?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for this invitation. I want to thank the Black Diamond, and I want to thank the French Embassy and the French Institute for this opportunity to talk to you here. I had since I arrived, a wonderful time, my first time in Denmark, and I want to thank you for this weather that goes against everything I believed about the cliche I had about this country. It's a pleasure to meet you. I want to say it in public and in front of you all, because as you probably know, being a woman and a rabbi very often feels like being an unidentified flying object. And it's great to meet another unidentified flying object, because it feels much less lonely, and we somehow want to believe that the others are the unidentified flying object, maybe, and we could become a kind of norm, or at least more normative in our religious backgrounds and words. So yes, to answer your question, I believe that our commitment today is more than meaningful and actually, yeah, I do believe world-changing, because I think that generally speaking, the question of women's role and women's place in a system, just like the text that you read from Françoise Imre's book, always says something about the ability of a system to make room for otherness, generally speaking. I think the role and the place that a system is willing to make for women and for feminine values is always the marker of the room that system is willing to make to any type of otherness. Whether you call that other, that big other, that alterity, whether you call it non-believer, non-practicing, homosexual, minor, whatever. I mean, migrant, you could decline it to many, many different paths. But actually, this first other, that is the woman in our society, the way you treat that person in our system says a lot about your capacity to make room for otherness. And unfortunately, most of the time, religious world show that they're unable, and religious discourse show that at least they have a very hard time making room for otherness. And this is the core, I think, of the problem we experience today, this inability of our religious systems to consider the porosity of its world, to consider the liminal zones of its identities, to consider the pluralistic voices inside itself, to make room for others, basically. This is why I believe that it's particularly meaningful that women are gaining leadership and access to text and textual education in the religious world. Because if it does not happen here, it will not happen anywhere.
Sherin, you are a sociologist, you are, as we heard, a former politician, you critical Muslims, the exit circle. You have done a lot of things throughout, for a lot of time. And now you're an imam in the making. You're not yet an imam, but you're becoming one.
Yes.
Is that not only a step for you, but a step for mankind, if I may say so?
I like the fact that you use the term, the making of an imama. Actually, I use the term imama because that's the feminine Arabic A. And it's a new word. So we have created a new word, imama. Yes, I am in the process of becoming an imama, and we all are. And we are in the process of establishing a new Islamic faith community in Denmark. The Mariam Mosque, is it called? It's in the central street in Copenhagen, placed. And I think it's very important to underline the fact that it's a process, and we're in the middle of a process. Because what does it mean to be an imam, and what does it mean for women's rights? To have female imams in the mosques, to have female imams entering the chair, leading the khutbah, leading the prayer, teaching other people, promoting Islam in the media. What does it mean that if you are a woman or a man and you are facing a problem, facing a dilemma? We have a new generation of young Muslims in European countries who are facing dilemmas concerning marriage. It could be all kinds of things. So what does it mean to have female imamas? It means something. I think it can make a difference, and I think it already has made a difference. We are challenging the patriarchal structures within religious institutions, and this is not only a problem within Islam, it's a problem within Judaism, Christianity, and other religions, that these institutions are still patriarchal in their structures. And we have for so many years normalized these patriarchal structures. I think 1 year ago, many Danes and Muslims didn't really knew that there were female imams today in the world, that it's not a new phenomenon. We have female imams in China since the 1820s, a lot of women's mosques in China, in South Africa since 1995, in Canada since 2005, in 2006, the great female scholar Amina Wadud, she led the Friday prayer for both men and women. In Los Angeles, they recently, last year, opened a female mosque, a women's mosque with female imams. In Köln, in Germany, they have female imams. So it's not a new phenomenon, and it's spreading. And I think it will have an effect. In the Maria Mosque in Copenhagen, we are focusing on women's rights. And it's not only a matter of Islamic feminism. I think the higher aim is to promote progressive Islamic values, to give rebirth to all the great female and male scholars within the Islamic tradition and history. And I think this will have an effect. And actually being an imama, it's not only about leading the Friday prayer, it's about being an Islamic spiritual care person. And in order to do so, I think the most important characteristic is to be embracive, to embrace all the people you meet and to meet them where they are. And we have women contacting us with problems concerning divorce, physical, mental abuse. It could be someone who lost a child, problems with being pregnant. There's so many sensitive issues, issues concerning women's rights also, where women prefer to speak to a female imam instead of a male imam. So, and the fact that we are focusing on women's rights specifically, I think this will have an impact, and it will affect women's rights at a universal level also.
Delphine, I'm going to ask both of you about your background. You know, what kind of family do you come from? What kind of outlook? What kind of opportunities you've been raised with? And you first, Delphine, the family background that has allowed you to stand here today. Where do you come from?
It's interesting because I'm very often asked the question, what led you to where you are? And I think it's the most difficult question to answer because no one ever knows what brought him or her to be where he is and what were the factors that impacted this path and this journey. So I grew up in a French Jewish family. I grew up in a quite traditionalist Jewish family. My parents are involved in the French Jewish life. Interestingly, I come from a family with two very different narratives, history. My father comes from a typical French Jewish family, settled in France from before the French Revolution, very, very settled in French, and they were saved by non-Jews during the war, and feel very, very grateful to this nation. And from my mother's side, it's totally a different story because they arrived from Eastern Europe after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, having lost everything, and being very unsettled and not very confident in the outside world, and that's a euphemism. So somehow as a child I grew up between these two narratives that were competing each other. Did I totally belong to the French history and nation, or was I partly a foreigner? Did the non-Jew saved me, or did he threaten me, or maybe killed me, in a way? And these competing narratives actually took me years to understand this, but led me to question maybe differently my Jewish identity. And very, very early in my life, I questioned what it meant for me to be a Jew, which is a very Jewish thing to do. There is a typical joke that says when you ask a Jew a question, he has to answer you with another question. So I did that very early. What was your question, by the way? So very early, I wondered what this identity could be. And then I studied very different things and moved to different countries. I studied medicine in Israel, and then I studied journalism in Paris. I started to study the text quite early. When I was a journalist on French television, I was already very, very interested in studying the text, because it had to do with the fact that I really wanted my Judaism to be alive. I was terrified, actually, that my Jewish identity would have too much to do with the Shoah, with death, with something morbid, only with memories of a catastrophe. So I think I was aware very early that I wanted my Judaism to be grounded in life and life renewal. And actually, for me, study was the core of this going back to life, of this alive L'chaim Judaism. So I started to study very early, but very early also I encountered the same recurring scenario, that I would knock on doors and saying I would like to study Talmud, and I would get the same answer. They would tell me, we have a class, but not for you. Not for you as a woman, because Talmud class were only for men. Women for a long time, and it's still the case in many places, can study Bible or religious thought, but not Talmud. It's a no woman's land, in a way. So it took me years to understand that my journey had to lead me to other places, and that other places was for me America. I moved to New York, where progressive Judaism is the majority and liberal Jewry is the norm. And there I discovered the world of the yeshiva, the house of study. And slowly it brought me to rabbinical school. And people very often ask me, what's the link between medical school and journalism and rabbinical school? Actually, I think there is a very strong link between those professions. And this link is the will to listen to the other's story as a sacred narrative. I think it's at the core of medical commitment, or should be. I think it's the core of what being a journalist can be and should be, the ability to listen and to accompany and to translate the other's discourse as a sacred text. And actually, this is exactly what brought me, I think, to the rabbinical path, which has as its core an ability to translate, to accompany, and to make this permanent journey between the human and the text, making sure that no one steps upon the other on this journey, that there is constantly a respectful dialogue between text and humanity.
What did your parents think about,
Oy.
Oh, yeah.
When I told them I'm going to be a rabbi, that was the shock, because, we often say that being a rabbi is not a job for a good Jewish boy. But imagine for a good Jewish girl, it's even worse. So it took them, I think they were really supportive in the idea that I would study. Because very, very, very early in my life, as a child actually, we would go to synagogue. And as a child, very early, I was already complaining, I don't know if it's the word, but at least questioning why the values that were taught at home or at school, the values that were cherished and important to my parents and family, were basically not represented in synagogue. And why was it okay that somehow the synagogue was not expected to be conform to our secular beliefs? And this was not clear to me, so I was always the rebellious child that the rabbis was getting into his office and saying, okay, what's your next question? Because I was always indeed asking these questions, so I guess my parents were not very surprised that I chose the rabbinic path, that I chose to study and then to become a rabbi. But now they're very supportive, and it's even obvious for them. Maybe it's less for my husband, who didn't choose to become a rabbi and find himself being the husband of the rabbi, which maybe we'll talk about it, but it's a very difficult task, because for centuries we know what could be the task of the wife of the rabbi or the imam, but no one defined what it can be to be the husband of the imam or the rabbi. And now it's a new challenge, I guess, for my kids. For my kids were, even though, you know, I very often I tell this funny story, and I have to share with you today. When my son, who is now 10-year-old, was 6, I asked him typical question: what do you want to do when you'll grow up? And he said, I want to be a king or a fireman. As I said, okay, don't you want to be a rabbi? And he said, that's a girl's thing.
That's good. And maybe your parents get to see you on television now as well, so maybe they're happy anyway. Sherin, what kind of family do you come from?
Oh, it's dangerous because my parents are here today.
Mm-hmm. Say something nice.
Okay, no. It's I just have to think a little bit. My father, he's from Syria, and he's a political refugee from Syria. He fled under the Hafez al-Assad regime. And he was an activist also. He wrote for different newspapers, both in Damascus and in Beirut. And he also wrote a short novel called Strangers When We Met. And yeah, he was very active. And then he came to Denmark. And he comes from, he has 6 sisters and brothers. And my grandfather used to call to prayer from the Umayyad Mosque. My mother, she comes from Finland, from a small village called Mahlu. You won't be able to identify it on any map. And she has 8 sisters and brothers, and when she was 21, she became a nurse, and she couldn't find work in Finland, but in Denmark they were looking for nurses, so she came here. And my parents met, and in central Copenhagen, and here the narratives are very differently. They always are. So they met, and my father proposed to my mother, and she said no, but then they married after a week. And they're still married today, and happily married. So, and she's a Christian, and he's a Muslim. My father became a practicing Muslim, I think 5 years ago, when the war in Syria started, or when the Assad regime started to massacre its population. And my mother, she's a Christian, or Christian with maybe also a little bit agnostic. And in my family, they always focused on the spiritual path. So religion never gave, religion was never a problem in our family, because they both had a spiritual approach to their religions. And so since I was a child, I was used to navigate between different religions and between different cultures. And I think that I remember when...
Do you mean you were not brought up Christian or Muslim, but, you know, a bit of both? Or?
Actually, I mean, my mother made a compromise that we would be born as Muslims, but my father made the compromise that we should have the freedom to choose our religion. So I chose to be a Muslim when I became older. When I was around 19, 20, my journey started. I knew that I had 2 things I wanted to study, psychology or religion, and I chose religion. And I knew that I wanted to specialize in Islam, so I think my journey began around that time when I was around 19 and started studying Islam academically. And but I just wanted to go back to the family, because I think the way we are brought up, the way we see our parents treat each other, the relationship between the mother and the father, how do they love each other, what kind of respect, the mutual respect between them, I think all these things matters. And what are we taught? Are we taught that you can be anything, or are there limits to what we can be or become? I never imagined that I would stand here today as a potential female imam, but and I think my parents would never expect that too. Actually, my father, he only recently found out that I was one of the female imams in the mosque, and he was shocked, really shocked. And he said, because the Maryam Mosque went worldwide, so he heard it through Arab news, and he said, "Are you one of the female imams?" And I said, "Well, I'm in the process of becoming a female imam." And he said, "But you don't know how to recite the Quran by heart, and you're not wearing the hijab. So how is that possible?" But I think we have to reinterpret or understand that we are a new generation, and we think differently, and even the term imama or rabbi has to go through a process, and people give things meaning differently. So, yeah, what was your question? Sorry.
Exactly that, I think.
Yeah, how did it affect my childhood?
Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you were not brought up with, the limitations as to what did your parents dream of for you? Do you think?
For me to become?
Yeah, a doctor, a journalist, or
my mother, she never had ambitions on behalf of us, and I'm really grateful for that. She always told me that you have to raise your children without raising them. So I think my sister, she wanted to study Arabic, and I wanted to study religion, and he thought it was crazy. He said, I mean, what can you use these subjects for? I mean, this is totally insane, but actually it turned out very well, so.
Delphine, I know that sometimes when you meet more orthodox communities in France, they are reluctant to introduce you as a rabbi, and they use euphemisms such as you're a teacher or a lecturer,
Yeah.
People don't really want to accept you as a rabbi.
Yeah, this is why I think the term is very important, because very often people tell me, okay, you can do what you do, but why do you really have to have this title? And indeed, maybe I don't need that title, but actually it does make a difference, because this is how change is activated by the fact that we use the same term, but are able to make new interpretations, which is a very religious pattern. We have a text, and we're expected to renew meanings and renew interpretations. That's the core of our activity, I think. So it happens to me less often now, but at the beginning, when I moved back to France, I found myself invited in different synagogues to teach Talmud, to give Jewish thought classes. And I have an anecdote. One day, an Orthodox synagogue invited me to give a lecture, and just a week before the invitation, they said, okay, how do you want to be introduced? And I said, you have my CV, I'm a rabbi, you know where I studied, it's very easy. Wikipedia can help you. And they said, but you understand, we cannot call you a rabbi because it goes against our religious belief. And it was a real dilemma for me, should I go to a place that doesn't recognize my title and my path, or should I refuse? And I was very surprised when they asked me, how do you want to be introduced? So my first reaction was that I told them, okay, if you want to lie about my path, then I would like you to introduce me as the Queen of England. And then I realized that it wouldn't work. No, but frankly, then I thought that...
You don't look like her, so...
Really?
No, it wouldn't work.
So then I realized that actually the idea was for me to come and talk, and it was already very meaningful that they did invite me to talk. So I said, use whatever term you want. And indeed, they introduced me as a teacher, and the minute I had a microphone, not as sophisticated as this one, which makes me feel today a little bit like Céline Dion at the Las Vegas concert. So when he gave me the microphone, I just said, as a rabbi, blah, 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 and the story was over. But sometimes, these micro changes and the question of how you call someone makes all the difference. That's why I think we should keep these terms and not try to invent new ways to call us, because the fact that we keep the same terms really confirm that we are faithful heirs to our tradition. And this is the point. We are a faithful heir to our tradition because we are courageous enough to change it. And that may sound paradoxical, but I truly believe that the recipe and the secret for a continuation in our tradition is an ability to be enough faithful and unfaithful to keep it alive. And that's a very tricky thing to do. That's almost an Olympic sport. I don't know. It's very difficult to do, but I think that's the key. We are faithful inheritor because we consider it's important enough to evolve.
But you know, it's like having a doctor at a hospital, a female doctor, asking her, is it okay if we just call you nurse? Wouldn't it be easier for everyone if we just call you a nurse? Yeah.
Yeah,
and you know,
resonate with many situations.
The Danish 19th century clergyman and poet Grundtvig once said, the word creates what it names. So it's very, very important what words we use, what kind of language we use to describe the world, to talk about the other. Mm-hmm. So, yes, insist, please.
Mm-hmm. I think if one field tells us that words matter, it's really religious thought. I think this is all about interpretation, and we know so well that the words can change the world. It's difficult to say with a French accent, but that actually the meaning and the translation of one word can change civilization. We have a very good example of that in the Bible. I would just say just a short word about this passage that everybody knows, or think he or she knows. It's the passage about Eve, or the woman being created in Genesis at the beginning of the Bible, and everybody believes it's from a bone, from Adam's bone. You know, it comes from a word in Hebrew, tsela, which is translated in most Bible as the costal bone, as if the woman had been created out of that bone. The problem is that in Hebrew, it doesn't exactly mean that. In Hebrew, tsela means the side. So the side or the costal bone are two possible translations of the same word in Hebrew, tsela. But as you can understand, if you choose to translate that verse suggesting that the first woman was created out of a bone, or that she was created on the side of another human being, alongside, so you can see that the civilizational consequences of this translation are just huge, because in one case, femininity is a subject, an object that belongs to a subject that is masculine. And if you choose the other translation that is more right according to Hebrew, then you can totally envision a masculine-feminine subject-to-subject relationship. So just imagine how the world would be today if we had changed one translation. That's huge.
Let's talk a little more about text and meaning. And Sherin, you want to recite a text for us, I think, but you're only just starting to learn how to recite in the proper way. Can you talk us about this whole science of reciting the Quran in the right way?
Yeah, I mean, Tajweed, the methodology of reciting the Quran is a scientific discipline along with other discipline. And if you look at the term imama, it's a non-protected term, and this creates a problem. In Denmark, we don't have an imam education, so the imams we have in Denmark, they are imported from outside, some of them, and maybe they have a longer education within Islamic sciences from Al-Azhar or another Islamic university from outside. But the problem is that they don't understand the language, they don't understand the culture, maybe they don't understand the dilemmas that the young people are facing. And then we have imams in Denmark who are like, some call them Google imams, or they just, we recently saw a program with 8 mosque communities where the imams were teaching women and men the worst thing. So the problem is this title is not protected. So what do we do? I think it's very important to underline that knowledge is very important. So in order to become an imam or an imama, you need knowledge. You need knowledge within the Islamic sciences. And you have to look at the need. Is there a need? Is there a need for female imams? And you have to look at the theology. I will come back to that later. But if we look at knowledge, in our mosque, in the Maryam Mosque, we are 3 female imams, and then we have Islamic spiritual care persons, and we are constantly trying to educate ourselves. I just started on a new education at the Faculty of Theology. It's a master in Islamic theology, besides my own study. And we are starting an Islamic academy where we will teach Arabic, Tajweed, Sufism, Islamic feminism, Islamic philosophy, and we have recruited the best teachers in Denmark to stand for this teaching. So in the future, when we are recruiting potential female imams, we will offer them to this education in the mosque. So we believe that knowledge is very important, but individually, none of us is complete. We are totally incomplete, and this is why I told you before that I'm in the process of becoming an imama, and I think it's very important to have that humbleness. But at the same time, we always get the question, from where do you get your legitimacy? I mean, how are you able to call yourself an imama? How is that possible at all? And to answer this question, we need to look at the need, the knowledge, and what does Islamic theology say about this matter? If we look at the theology, and I know your question was different,
but
just trying to make you forget it. If we look at the theology, what does Islamic theology and the Islamic tradition say about female imams? Is it possible at all? If we look at the Quran encourage both men and women to seek knowledge. This is very obviously, and men and women are equal, spiritual equal partners. 3 out of 4 Islamic schools allow female imams leading the prayer for other women. Only Maliki denies it or rejects it. One school believes it's makrur, it means it's a dislike but still accepted act. So 3 out of 4 schools allows it. Al-Azhar University allows female imams. Tabari actually allows female imams for both men and women, which is quite interesting. And Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, she led the prayer for women. There's a very interesting hadith called Waraka. It's a very disputed hadith, but it tells that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he asks a woman called Waraka to lead the prayer for both men and women, for her community. So we have examples in the Islamic tradition, in Islamic theology, allowing this. And as I said earlier, we have female imams several places in the world today. But the question about legitimacy and the question about the title, the question about which word to use, it is, controversial. And a lot of people told me that just let go of the title, because let go of the title. If you let go of the title, you will be more progressive, you will be more successful. And why do you need that title after all? But I think, as Delphine said, it's very important to keep the title. And because we are doing the same thing. We are leading the prayer, we are leading the khutbah, we are Islamic spiritual care persons, we are making Islamic ceremonies, so we are doing the same thing as the male imams.
You're marrying people, you're naming people, etc. You do these...
Yes, we do. Yeah. So I think also it's important to keep the title, why not? In Morocco, for instance, they use the title Murshidats. The Moroccan state educates 50 Murshidats a year in order to combat radicalization. And the women go around and they teach, they are great Islamic teachers. They have to have a very, very high theological level in order to be recruited for this title, Murshidats. But they don't lead the Friday prayer. And because they don't lead the Friday prayer, they use the term Murshidat. So I've met a lot of people who urge us to use that term or Islamic spiritual care person, but I think it's important to hold on to the title because it makes a difference, and it is the only way to challenge the patriarchal structures.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that the question of legitimacy, where do you get from legitimacy, is very central, because I think we all tend, maybe particularly women in these positions, we all tend to feel like imposture. It's very easy to convince a woman, or it's very easy for women to believe in many, many situations that they are imposture, that they are not supposed to be where they are. And who gave them the right to raise their voice? Who gave them the right even to have a voice in the public sphere? And I think it's quite common, unfortunately, in all religious discourse, no matter which religion, that women's voices is expected to be hidden, is expected to be, in the world of the inside, in the home, to be a good wife and to be a good mother. You're supposed to lower your voice and not to make it heard in the outside world. And I was thinking of it, and I have to share it with you because I was thinking of it this very morning. This is my Danish inspiration of the day, that I want to thank François Imre and his wife. They took me this morning to see The Little Mermaid. I had to see The Little Mermaid. And The Little Mermaid made me think of something that actually, what does this story tells us? This story has many other children stories. Let me tell you the story of The Little Mermaid, dear friends. The Little Mermaid basically tells you that femininity belongs to the undersea. It belongs to the underworld. And if it wants to exist outside, it loses its voice. The Little Mermaid can only be silent when it's not under the sea, And I believe that, as you see, The Little Mermaid is not a story that is told in the Quran or the Torah, but actually this is what we tell our kids, this is what we tell our children, and it doesn't mean we have to stop telling them these beautiful stories, but we really need to be aware of where we put femininity and what we teach through these stories, and how we can give them ways and tools to interpret these ideas, what are basic in our civilizations, what are the values we want to raise for the next generation.
I was always taught by my father that the perfect man is a woman. And I tell my children that the word Allah, it means it's above gender. So I think that's very important.
But I think from Anderson, it's a story about how unjust it is that she should sacrifice her voice in order to gain love and reconnaissance from men. But if you take, there have been some really interesting studies made recently by American film journals about if you take 20, 30 years of Hollywood movies, and not from the old times, but the recent, the last 20 years, you will find that men take up about 70 or 80% of the dialogue. Women in Hollywood movies, or in Danish movies, or in French movies, women are, just there, looking admiringly, or just being beautiful, while men talk and talk and talk. So we're perpetuating this in our popular culture in everywhere.
Yeah, actually, it's present everywhere, and I think we really need to be aware that very often religious discourse are the epitome of this phenomenon. But we should be able really to look around us and everywhere in our culture where it features, because we have the strength to do that. We can do that.
We can do that. And if you take newspapers or if you take radio, you will find that men experts take up also about 70 or 75% of the space, because it's easier for journalists to just phone a man and get a man to do the talking instead of being a little bit imaginative and call a woman.
And when we go to conferences, I think 90% are men in the panel and the rest are women. Yeah. And they always ask me when we are mingling, the men always ask me, because I'm the mother of 4 children, small children, so they always ask me when they are told that I have children, the first question is, who's looking after the children?
Of course.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah, this is always the... And also we are, very often asked the same questions about what it means to be a spouse, what it means to be a mother in this position. Are we somehow betraying femininity through this function? This is very classical questions that we have to face. And also other questions, other misunderstandings or cliché about women is that very often people think that essentially because I'm a woman, women rabbis are going to be more able of empathy and of listening empathetically, and there's a lot of cliché in that, because just like me, many women were not at all tender and caring and empathetic.
but
you probably know,
But I do believe that women have experiences that men doesn't have, and we have to acknowledge that. So giving birth, it's an experience, and it has a value. So if you are facing a woman who's going through a birth depression or who's sad about her pregnancy, I mean, we have something to offer that the man cannot offer, maybe in the same way.
It's like you want to have a female doctor because a female doctor understands your body better. You also want maybe a female rabbi or
in my synagogue we are 2 rabbis,
yes.
a man and a woman, and it's very interesting to see who turns to whom in which situation. And I noticed that sometimes indeed women turn to me because they can only talk with a woman about specific topics, and sometimes it's the opposite. It's interesting that men prefer to talk to women about specific life issues, and you never expect exactly who is going to turn to you. So I think you're totally right. We bring different experiences. We bring who we are, our bodies, our experience, our life. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we are not enclosed and unlocked in what is supposed to be the attribute of our gender, because
I agree.
as if as a woman I was only able to be like a caring, listening person, and I could not express the more masculine attributes, that actually, as you said, our traditions teach us that we are in the image of God that has both the masculine and the feminine attributes. What is interesting is that our tradition, I think, teach men that they can be masculine and feminine. For example, in the Jewish tradition, it's very clear that there are specific rites, rituals, that enable men to be very feminine. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you go to a synagogue in the morning, maybe it happens to you, you'll see that men do wear what we call tefillin, which are kind of jewelry around their
the leather straps,
the
little text
on their head and around their arm and around their finger, which really looks like a female jewelry. And it's not only that, when they put on this ring around their finger, they speak about themselves in Hebrew in the feminine form. So it's an acceptance that men sometimes are women like all other women, that men can be able to own these feminine qualities of capacity to receive, basically. Passivity or capacity to be the receiver. So it's interesting that our traditions are totally okay with the idea that men can be both masculine and feminine, but they really have a hard time imagining that a woman can be not only feminine. So I raise these questions, I have no answer, but it strikes me always that this is where the resistance always comes from. This inability to let women invest also their masculine sides.
Sherin, we have put it off for a while, but you promised that you would sing, or recite rather, even though you have had one lesson
Yes.
of reciting.
Yeah,
But
I think
can you
it's...
tell us about the text that you're going to, that you've chosen?
I haven't chosen one yet, thinking which one to choose. But it's, I will read maybe the opening chapter, Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Nasr maybe, and Ikhlas. And I think it's a metaphor for saying that becoming a female imam, it's a process. And I asked, actually, I didn't want to read myself. I asked if I could play a professional tajweed reader, a woman. Her name is Shaista. She has been reciting the Quran since she was 4 years old, so for 16 years. But you refused, and you said that I had to do it. So, but then you can hear how it sounds in the beginning, and maybe we could play the other in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to stand here because you're doing it afterwards.
I can try
Yeah,
to
okay.
do something. I'm not going to sing.
So I just want you to close your eyes. Don't fall asleep. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. You're welcome. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you knew that, you're not supposed to clap because I'm a Muslim. No, I'm just kidding.
But apart from the fact that you're a beginner in this art and you did it beautifully,
Thank you.
is it,
My teacher, she's very angry right now. Her name is Rada Razal, and she's from Syria, and she had my first lecture this week, and she told me, you're not going to recite anything. You won't recite anything. So,
You were amazing.
so I hope nobody recorded it.
but is it provoking, not only, standing here and reciting, but the fact that you as a woman recite, is that provoking in itself?
No, I wouldn't say so.
No.
I mean, we have lots of female Muslim women who are reciting the Quran all over the world. So, but I think in Denmark, I made a movie some years ago, and I asked Shaista, which I mentioned before, she's a professional, and I asked her to read the Quran, and it is really beautiful. You can find it on YouTube, and she was the first female Muslim academic who did it in Denmark. So I think it was the first official one in Denmark when she did that. And but it's not controversial. I mean, it's a discipline according with other disciplines. So
It's just new here.
As I said earlier, men. Our religious institutions are patriarchal, so we are used to listen to men reciting, leading the prayer, giving the khutbah. So of course it is something new in Denmark and in Scandinavia and in most countries still.
Delphine?
Yeah. First of all, it's amazing what you did, so beautiful. I was thinking while you were singing that of course, you kept repeating that word that is so central in the Quran, Ar-Rahim.
Ar-Rahman Rahim.
Ar-Rahman Rahim,
Yes.
which is almost the same word in Hebrew. We call God Ar-Rahman, which is merciful, as we
Yes.
often translate it. But it's interesting because the roots, both in Arabic and Hebrew, of
Rahim.
Rahim,
And it means the womb.
it's the womb, actually.
Yes.
The way we call God in Hebrew and Arabic
Yeah.
is the womb. It's the matrix. It's It's the ability of God to be all-encompassing, nourishing, which gives the meaning of
create.
merciful. So this is what always strikes me, is that our religion, who call their God womb, which means the anatomic part of a female body
Yes.
that is somehow fertilized by another to create something new, specifically and particularly have a problem with femininity, change, and contamination. So this is the paradox that I'll leave you with.
I would like to add something to that, because the first term, Rahman, it's like it means that God is merciful. No matter what we do, He's merciful, not He. Allah is merciful, all-embracive, and the other term, Rahim, it's like more of a verb, where the first is an adjective, if you could say so. It means that if you come close to Allah, if you do good deeds, if you take one step to Allah, He will come running to you. So and it's like the womb. The womb, it contains life. It's Rahman, and it gives life, Rahim. So yeah, I get high when I think about it.
It's striking how extremely well educated you are, and how how much, I guess, to break ground and to win over even men, you have to sometimes know more than men, right? You have to be even better educated.
Well, very often the resisting forces against this change expect you or won't let you have any mistake, in the way you interpret the text. What is expected from you, unfortunately, not only in religions, but for every one woman who steps a new ground, on new ground, is that indeed you have at the beginning to be very strong and to make sure that you'll never let people convince you you're an imposter, but that you can be there as much as they can be, and it's a difficult task.
Delphine, you wanted, or you not wanted, but we sort of coerced you into performing also. But rather than reciting a text, you wanted maybe to
I don't
sing
know what I said.
from the liturgy. Right?
I was thinking maybe I could tell you a story from the Talmud, or I could sing a song that we sing.
Now that you
sometimes
have
in
this
synagogue.
beautiful microphone.
Now that I feel like Las Vegas. So let me sing with you a song that is actually quite recent in our liturgy. It's this song is in Hebrew and Arabic, and we very, very often sing it in synagogue. It speaks about shalom, and it speaks about salam, about the peace that hopefully will come upon us. And it's not an empty prayer. It's really what we deeply feel we need in this dark world. So I'll share that song with you. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam.
You have pointed out the philological similarities between the liturgical texts and the Quran and the Talmud and the Torah. And you talked about how that seminal passage in Genesis has defined our way of looking at men and women for 3,000 years or something like that. What happens? What would happen if you set out as a group of women to translate the whole Torah anew? What kind of text would come out of that? Has anyone done that? Trying to make a non-gender biased version of the Bible?
New topic. Actually, some people try to do that in the Jewish world. There is a commentary that was released a few years ago by American rabbis who made translation but also interpretation of the Torah with feminine voices. And actually, in the Jewish tradition, interpretation is always much more important than translation, because it seems very blasphemy to say that, but in Judaism we don't really care about what is written, we care about how it's read. So the reader always have much more power than the author in a way. So it's a very important and interesting exercise, and we need to continue with such attempt. But I think what is more important than that is to acknowledge that the problem with any translation is that it suggests that this is what the text means. And it locks and makes it definitive. And this is exactly what we don't need.
Yeah, and many of these words have multiple
well, this is true in Hebrew
meanings.
And this is true in Arabic. Our languages are what we call polysemic. When you take a word in Hebrew, it means this and something else and the contrary, which makes it almost impossible to translate a verse, because it can mean also the opposite. And the problem with each translation is that it suggests to the reader that the text spoke once and for all. And I think what we need to teach is that the text can still talk, and that we cannot end the meaning. And it is sacred because it's still pregnant with other voices, other seeds that we can fertilize through our readings. And more important than new translations, we need to teach the openness of translation and the unending names of God in the text. So it seems to me like the work we have to do, continuing.
What do you say, Sherin?
Yeah, we try to emphasize all the great female and male scholars who are interpreting the Quran or rereading the Quran with a focus on women's rights. And Sherin Khankan, she's from Pakistan, a professor of law. She wrote a book called Equal Before Allah, Unequal Before Man. And in this book, she shows that out of all the verses in the Quran, only 6 verses could be interpreted as discriminating women, but they could also be interpreted differently. And she, along with other scholars, are giving alternative rereadings. And I think that's very interesting. And we try to emphasize that in our community, and we are trying to spread the word. There's a new Danish Quran translation. It's by Amr Majid, and let me just give you an example. There's a passage in the Quran where it says the men, it's translated with the man is above the woman. El-rijalu qawwamuna al-nisa. And he gives an alternative interpretation, like the other modernist scholars. He interpreted not as the man is above the woman, but the man is taking care of the woman. And I know some feminists would say that's not better, but it is better. So we have a long tradition for scholars trying to reread the text in a way that equal men with women. So it's not something new, and we're trying to emphasize this, and we try to focus on this and underline it.
Can I ask both of you, why it was so important for you to assume leadership and assume this role within your religion, because you said how you knocked on all these doors and every door was knocked and you were told, this is not for you, this is not for a woman, this is not for a girl. Why not just, turn your back and walk away and say, well, since you don't want me, good riddance, we'll never see each other again, I'll go out and find something else. And why was it so important? Nobody wants you, but you stay and you fight. Why did you do that?
I don't know. I don't know, because I think a voice in me says I had no choice. It felt that I just couldn't be anywhere else, and just the path was leading me in this direction. And
a vocation.
The more I study, the more I feel that what I'm doing is no revolution, and it seems paradoxical because people think I'm doing like something that some people think that goes against tradition, that it's new, and really the more I study, the more I feel that what I'm doing is very traditional, even in the way I question the text. Basically there is nothing more, if we think about Jewish tradition, there's nothing more Jewish than to question what you received. It's striking that we chose as a father figure in our traditions Abraham, who is known in the Bible as a man who left his father's house. So I don't know if you understand what this paradox is about. We chose as a father figure someone who got rid of his own father. What type of sons, what type of son is that? And from this idea, where do we go? What does it mean to be the child of Abraham? Does it mean to follow blindly his path? Or does it mean that we are able to do what he did to his own parents, in a way? This ability to break, to be faithful, what I was talking about earlier. Faithfulness to a tradition, paradoxically, very often is a breaking through. It's not following blindly and reproducing what has been done. It's to be as creative as what past generations have done, And this is where I feel that I'm simply following a very traditional path. No doubt that there is resistance, but to answer your question, I feel that another voice in me just says that I had to do that for the little girl that I was, indeed, that knocked on the door and felt that she was lacking other models, felt that there were voices that she expected to hear in the synagogue and did not find. And indeed, that little girl could have decided, to use a French expression, I don't know if it exists in English, to throw the baby with the water of the bath, we say in French, yeah. So, you could get rid totally of the system saying it will not evolve and I want to have nothing to do with it. Or you can decide that your voice can change the temperature of the bath.
Yeah, so we were the first Muslim organization in Denmark with female Muslim leadership. We had only female spokespersons. We were advocating for objectives as Islamic pluralism, separation between religion and politics, a more spiritual approach to the interpretation and understanding of the Quran, and female Imams. And 15 years later, we tried to manifest the idea in real life. It took us 15 years to reach to this point where we experienced, or I experienced, that there is a need in our society. We have a new generation of young Muslims who do not feel at home. Not all of them, but some of them do not feel at home, maybe in the existing communities. I think we are attracting a new generation of young people who misses a more spiritual approach to the Quran. A community where people are, equal in the sense that when they enter the room, they feel that there is a certain atmosphere of a community. It's hard to explain, but it took us 15 years, so it's not something that happened overnight. And I think it's also, first of all, it's a matter of observing a need. So I observe a need, and I myself felt a need for a community with female imams. And it's not about Islamic feminism. It's not really about female imams. It's about spreading progressive Islamic values. So we have like 3 overall positions, and it's very categorical. The traditional position, the Islamist position, and the more spiritual approach or progressive position. And we would like to institutionalize the Sufi path within a mosque community. We have lots of Sufi communities, and they're great, but we don't have a mosque which is specifically Sufi orientated. We don't have a mosque with female imams. We don't have a mosque where who can create an alternative to the other positions, because most of the mosques in Denmark are traditional, and there's nothing wrong in that, because all the traditionalist position and the Islamist position are valid positions. We are not trying to deconstruct these positions. We're just trying to create an alternative, because we feel that there is a need for this. And the third thing, there is a growing Islamophobia in Denmark. So I do believe that female imams can challenge the growing Islamophobia, because it's very difficult to continue writing on the same narrative that Muslim women are suppressed when Muslim women are taking the lead, are leading the khutbah, are spreading progressive values. One of our members, he just got his book on Islamic philosophy into the curriculum at the University of Philosophy, the Faculty of Philosophy, and I think this can create a change. So, sorry for talking too much.
No, that's fine. Can I conclude by asking you both, how do you think that religion or spirituality or faith, after centuries of oppressing women, millennia of oppressing women, how can faith, spirituality help further female values, liberation of women, this fuel, the struggle, this universal struggle that Zimere talks about in his book? Can religion play a positive role in changing the world?
It can, and it should, in theory. The problem is that, unfortunately, in practice, it's often the opposite that happens, and we know it. But it could be different if religions, as I said at the beginning, are willing to invest and think about the question of otherness. They're supposedly in the best place to make a contribution in society on this question of the room we're able to make for the other in this womb that we talked about, al-Rahim, Rahaman. Supposedly our tradition is precisely supposed to bring something in the public discourse in society on this question of otherness. But it will come only if we're willing to invest in our own tradition where the other stands. Not only, the one who doesn't think like me, the one who doesn't believe like me, the one who doesn't look like me, the one who doesn't pray like me, but also being able to see in ourselves how our tradition has been so much impacted by its encounter with otherness, And this is where I think is the more critical theological point in our respective traditions today. I mean, I can speak of Judaism. I think Judaism is where it is today because it met the Greco-Roman world, the Persian world, the Muslim world, the Christian world. It met America and Europe. And actually, each and every practice and each and every holiday in the Jewish calendar is impacted and reflects the fact that Jewish tradition met and was influenced, and I would say fertilized, by this encounter with the other. And if we are not willing to recognize that none of us is pure of the other, then we're doomed. And just a word, and I insist on this idea of purity because, as you probably hear, it's the obsessional word of all fundamentalists. They all tell us about purity, purity of body and purity of tradition. So our only chance is to reclaim, in a positive way, the impurity, in a positive way, of our tradition. We are impure because we met the difference. And I think that's the important work we need to do. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Sherin, what role can spirituality, faith play?
I think it always played a role, and I think religion is here to stay. And I think people are becoming more religious and more spiritual and are seeking something greater. And I do believe that the Sufi path within Islam has a lot to offer when it comes to reconciliation and reconciling different religions, and because we are facing a dilemma, and the dilemma is, you can sum it up in the sentence, how do we live together in a world where one man's idea of a community is another man's political prison? And this is a dilemma. We're living in a world where people have different ideas of what is valuable. So I do believe that within the Islamic tradition, the Sufi path has a lot to offer because and I know that you cannot speak of Sufism as one thing because we have different orders and different interpretations of Sufism, but there are forms of Sufism that are all-embracive. I think many of you know Rumi, Ibn Arabi, Rabi al-Adawiyya, and I would like to quote Rumi. He says, come, 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 no matter who you are, no matter what you worship, even if you worship fire, come because our community is not a place for hopelessness. Come even though you have broken your vows 1,000 times, come, yet come again. So Rumi is an example of this all-embraciveness, and Ibn Arabi as well. He's one of the founders of Sufism. So I do believe that in order to use spirituality and religious in a positive way, we need to promote, or we need to focus and institutionalize Sufism. And I think that's important to create these alternatives and to show this alternative idea of what it could be like to be a Muslim in 2016. And
embracing impurity?
Yeah, I mean, impurity is, it's like imperfection. I mean, who wants to be perfect? And nobody wants to speak to a person who's perfect. So, so yes, it means embracing, also impurity.
Thank you.
Thank you.